Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm Janessa Goldbeck, CEO of the Vet Voice Foundation, a national nonpartisan organization that represents over 2 million veterans and military families across the country. It's an honor to welcome you to this town hall on the urgent threats facing our public lands. I want to start off by thanking Congressman Salud Carbajal and Congressman Joe Neguse for their leadership in protecting these vital landscapes. For veterans and military families, these lands aren't just for recreation, they're places of healing, connection, and renewal. But right now, they are under attack like never before. Project 2025, a policy blueprint being executed by the Trump administration, lays out an extreme industry-first agenda that would vastly expand oil, gas, and mineral extraction, turning our public lands into industrial zones. It would also gut environmental protections, putting clean air and water and veterans and military families at risk. Finally, it would dismantle conservation programs and even transfer federal lands back to states or private control. These aren't just harmful policies, they are an existential threat to the landscapes we fought and served to defend. I didn't serve this country to benefit oil and gas CEOs. I served to protect the land, water, and air that sustain us and all of the things that make America, America. This is a fight for our future, and we must take action now. And that's why we're here, to discuss what's at stake, how we can push back. With that, I will turn it over to Assistant Leader Neguse. Congressman, do we have the Congressman with us?
Yes. Hi, Janessa. My apologies.
No problem. See you. I think last time we were together was at the Camp Hale designation.
That's exactly right. Hard to believe. It's been almost 3 years now.
Feels like a lifetime since that time.
Yes, definitely.
Congressman, you played a key role in the creation of the Camp Hale Continental Divide National Monument. Can you speak to the role of national monuments and the Antiquities Act more generally in preserving our military history?
Well, first things first, thank you, Janessa. Of course, happy to answer that question, but thank you for bringing us together and really to the Vet Voice Foundation for convening this important conversation at a time when there are a lot of real fears, anxieties, and tensions building. I think the most valuable thing that we can do is to make sure our voices are heard and that the interests of the folks that we represent are being advocated for and vindicated. And an important part of that is a convening like this one. And I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you for your dedication to service, of course, both during your time in the United States Armed Forces and then, of course, now in the new missions and purposes that you've embraced here at home, and to all of those who've served who may be listening. With respect to your particular question, with regard to national monuments and the Antiquities Act, I think maybe the best way to address it is to take a step back, and perhaps I can share just a quick story that speaks to this particular issue and why our public lands preservations are so important and the connection to our nation's veterans. Just by way of background, many years ago, I had the privilege of meeting an incredible person, a man by the name of Sanford Morris Treat Jr. We knew him as Sandy. And a few years ago, I had a special opportunity to be able to tour Camp Hale with Sandy. And I don't know if you had a chance to meet him, Janessa, but he was just an incredible man who had served our country bravely during World War II, was a veteran who had trained on the very grounds that we were touring with the 10th Mountain Division. And then ultimately he would go on to spend his final years working to preserve and protect that land that had grown to mean so much to him and to an entire generation of service members and our nation's veterans. Tragically, Sandy passed away in 2019 before we were able to ultimately get Camp Hale designated as National Historic Site. But he told me something before he passed that has stuck with me ever since. And I want to read this. It's a quote that he said at an event that we were at back in 2019. He said, "I grew up in an America that valued our wild lands, and this is a value that I hope lives on long after I am gone." We made good on that promise with your help and the help of so many others, ultimately honoring the service of the 10th Mountain Division when President Biden made the decision to designate Camp Hale Continental Divide National Monument in 2002. And it's a designation that was made possible, coming full circle to your question, by the Antiquities Act. And it's one that will forever enshrine the legacy of the 10th Mountain Division into our nation's history. And also one, I might add, that would not have been possible without the tireless advocacy of veterans who had served, again, who had trained in that very place. Now, I say all of that, I know I'm probably gone far over my time, but I say it in the hopes that it is perhaps a lesson for all of us, that it's instructive, that not only do national monuments and the Antiquities Act really play an incredibly important role in preserving our nation's military history, but ultimately each and every one of us do, all of you do, those who are watching this live stream. And sometimes, that means beating the drum month after month, day after day, year after year, in support of public lands protections like these that not only ensure that our treasured public lands are preserved for the next generation, but honor our nation's veterans, our brave service members who sacrifice so much on our behalf. Now, before I turn things over back to Janessa, I just will also add, I'm honored to serve as the ranking member on the Subcommittee on Federal Lands, and we are certainly using every tool at our disposal to push back on any attempts to roll back critical protections for lands like Camp Hale, as well as many other cherished spaces across the nation. And, I look forward to hearing your suggestions, those who are listening, your ideas, ways in which we can collectively engage in this important work that's just so integral to protecting our public lands for generations to come. So thanks again, Janessa, and appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank you so much, Congressman. And we appreciate all of your leadership on Camp Hale and more broadly to push back against potential rollbacks. I did have the opportunity to meet Francis Lovett, who was another almost 100 years old when I first met him, had trained at Camp Hale, learned to ski there, and then went and fought the Nazis in the Alps. And so it was really, really incredible and such a unique experience to get to see that military history across generations be permanently preserved and protected, in addition to, of course, all of the biodiversity and natural resources that were protected by that designation.
Yeah. Oh, and I mean, another incredible service member who gave so much to his country. And we're grateful that entire generation of 10th Mountain Division veterans who really ultimately, their stories, their advocacy ultimately helped us make this national monument possible. So, do it in their name. And now we've got to make sure we preserve it.
Absolutely. Well, I want to be cognizant of your time, but if I may ask you one more question.
Sure.
I know you're very busy dealing with a lot on Capitol Hill this week, but for veterans or military family members or supporters who might be tuning in, who maybe live in districts where their member might be considering supporting a rollback of federal protections, or even there's a piece of legislation right now that would consider repealing the Antiquities Act. What would be your advice for constituents who might have members of Congress who are having those considerations?
I would say lift your voice, speak up, share your story. Storytelling is such an important part of this work, in my view, because there's so much that I think is perhaps not seen on the surface of a name, right? If I reference Camp Hale National Monument, and I offer no further explanation, there are certainly many who are familiar with Camp Hale and everything it stands for, but many who are not. And being able to share the stories of the veterans, the service members who sacrificed so much on behalf of our country and who trained at Camp Hale, being able to tell the stories of veterans from other wars over the course of the last 60, 70 years, whom have gone to Camp Hale and have been able to ultimately appreciate the scenic beauties and everything that Camp Hale stands for, and the experience that has had on them, I think, is an important part of the story. And it's something that we heard from many veterans during the course of the legislation making its way through the Congress, and then, of course, with respect to the regulatory decision made by the Biden administration at that time, a lot of veterans who shared their stories about what these treasured public lands meant to them, and it had an impact. And the final thing I would say is we should never assume that our public institutions are impervious to public opinion, right? That the Congress or the executive branch are not impervious, or rather are impervious to the views of the vast majority of the American people. I think if we share our stories and we ensure that they have the benefit of knowing the ways in which these public lands protections are serving each and every American, that we shouldn't assume that that's not going to have an impact. So your voice matters, and I would encourage folks to use their voice. It's the most important tool that we have as citizens of this great country.
I really appreciate that, Congressman. And, we've seen it in action, and especially because public lands have such strong bipartisan support, across the aisle. You don't have to be a Democrat or a Republican to love being outside in nature and understand the value of these public lands to us. So I think veterans' voices in particular have an outsized salience when it comes to these particular issues. We do have a question from one of the listeners, or viewers, if you have another minute or two.
Sure.
Okay. Do you see the perk of free admission to U.S. national parks for veterans going away with all the other cuts taking place right now? And maybe this is an avenue in to talk about some of the cuts to the National Park Service and the impacts on veterans in that regard.
It's a great question. I am fearful that could be in the cards. Something that, of course, as I'm sure you know, many of us in the Congress have fought for, in terms of being able to provide that access free of charge for our nation's veterans and their families. And given the kinds of rollbacks and dismantling of our federal land management agencies that are happening right now at the National Park Service, the Forest Service, the Department of Interior more broadly, the Bureau of Land Management, BLM, across the board, you're seeing a purge of thousands of federal employees, many of whom, by the way, are veterans, people who've served our country so honorably in our armed forces and now serving in another capacity, who are now unceremoniously being fired, terminated, laid off, purged from the federal workforce. And so, given the indiscriminate way that the administration has approached these decisions thus far, I think it's a reasonable fear for folks to have. We certainly are going to work to do everything we can to ensure that the administration follows the law, because a variety of these programs that ultimately benefit our nation's veterans vis-a-vis our national parks are statutory. They have been enshrined into federal law. So the administration ought not, and in my view, cannot disregard those statutes. But as you know, the administration has done so already on a number of different matters, and there are over 100 court cases pending in federal courts across the country on the propriety of the Trump administration's decisions. So we'll keep pushing. It's a great reminder for me and for my team on the Federal Lands Subcommittee for us to dig deep here and do everything we can to perhaps preemptively do what we can to protect that particular provision.
We certainly deeply appreciate that, and as do our members, as that came up in the chat. Congressman, I want to give you the opportunity to say any closing remarks. I'd also like to extend an offer that if you'd ever like to go out on a landscape with veterans, military families at home, we'd love to organize something like that, join you out there, especially if we see some rollbacks to things that we've worked so hard to protect.
I would love that. I'll take you up on that, and I look forward to doing so. And the only thing I would simply close with is how I started, that we owe a debt we can never repay to every one of our nation's veterans, every veteran who's listening, who's following this live stream. And we're going to continue to work to defend your interests and the interests of the American people here in Washington. And a big part of that is engaging with all of you directly. And so we'll welcome your feedback, your suggestions, your ideas, send them our way, and the work will continue.
We appreciate you so much. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, we're now very excited to be able to welcome another member of Congress, a fellow military veteran. Congressman Salud Carbajal is in studio with us, and let's give him a big vet voice welcome. Congressman, thank you so much for being here on a very busy day in Washington.
Thank you, Janessa. It is a very busy day in Washington. A lot of interesting things, to say the least, are going on with some interesting votes, some very important votes. So we'll see what transpires in the next vote series. But thank you for inviting me, and Semper Fidelis, Janessa.
Semper Fi. Good. Always great Always great to have another Marine in the house, and we really appreciate you working to hold the line on everything from public lands to veterans health care. It means a lot to us.
Great.
I wanted to ask you how your experience as a military veteran has shaped your relationship with veterans and veterans advocacy for our nation's public lands. Uh, Congressman, we can't hear you. Your mic is.
Great. Thank you. Thank
There
you
you
for
are.
reminding me. Well, as you mentioned, I served in the Marine Corps, and certainly it has helped shape my views on why we need to protect our public lands. Policies that protect our public lands from development and from the threats of oil drilling make certainly a difference in the fight against climate change. Gives individuals the opportunity to appreciate the great outdoors, and is a boost to our local economies. And I think as a veteran, I think you're sort of connected with the open spaces that we need to also train. This is the added benefits of preserving the plant and the animal life that call these places or these public lands home. In fact, my home state of California is home to the nation's largest active outdoor industry economy, contributing more than 73.8 billion in economic spending annually. In 2023, 36 million visitors came to California's national parks, and they spent 3.2 billion supporting almost 40,000 jobs. However, just as important, protecting these natural environments can help all branches of our armed services, as I mentioned earlier, train for various different and strategic terrains. It helps with our nation's readiness. For all these reasons, I'm a staunch supporter of protecting our public lands. I continue to push for my Central Coast Heritage Protection Act, which has passed the House 5 different times through various legislative vehicles. If enacted, it would protect 250,000 acres of land in the Carrizo Plain National Monument and the Los Padres National Forest as wilderness. It would establish a 400-mile, excuse me, long Condor National Recreation Trail stretching from Los Angeles to Monterey County. As mentioned, my district is home to the Los Padres National Forest, California's third largest national forest, the Carrizo Plain National Monument, and many other treasured places. As a matter of fact, my district is majestic. If you haven't been out to my district, you haven't seen all the beauty and the bounty that and the treasure that it is. We recently finalized the designation of the Chumash Marine Sanctuary, protecting coastal waters from oil and gas drilling and preserving sacred tribal sites. As we have seen in my district, my home state of California, and across the nation, protecting our environment and growing our economy are not mutually exclusive. And last but not least, for veterans suffering from PTSD, public lands provide a solitude, a renewal, and provide a reprieve for mental health and wellness. It's important to keep that in mind, and not just for veterans, but for people in general. So I want to thank you for all that you're doing to also lend a hand to protecting our public lands and commit to continuing to fight the good fight to make sure that we are protecting these lands for a multitude of reasons and uses.
Well, Congressman, we are so glad to have you in Congress as such a staunch defender of public lands and proactive agent on behalf of ensuring that our federal public lands are protected and preserved for generations to come. You had a big role in the recent expansion of the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument, the San Gabriel's National Monument, and you were incredibly impactful as a leader in the creation of two new national monuments in California, Satitla National Monument and the Chuckwalla National Monument out in the deserts of Southern California. So I just want to say thank you for that. It was really incredible to see the progress made, in particular in Chuckwalla, which, as you know, and our viewers might be interested to learn, is a place of great military heritage where General Patton prepared U.S. troops for fighting in the deserts of North Africa during World War II. And I've actually had the opportunity to be out on that landscape and see some of the old roads that are still there and the markers from the camps that were put out there. So really incredible that those are preserved and protected for the future. I would love to hear. I know that the outdoor recreation industry is a huge part of California's economy, and nearly 20% of Department of Interior employees are veterans. Many veterans work in the outdoor rec industry. I'm just curious if you could give us your perspective on how this so-called Department of Government efficiency and cuts to the federal workforce are impacting veterans who serve in the Department of the Interior and other agencies, and may impact the outdoor recreation industry writ large.
Well, first, I think we can say that there's nothing wrong with really looking at how we could be more efficient and look at continuous process improvements. But that's if truly that is the goal. But what we're seeing, this Doge thing, is a bunch of incompetent individuals who are seeking to destroy government with a sledgehammer, and it's really stupid. But what we're seeing is the layoff of so many individuals, many of which are veterans, in so many different areas, whether it's national parks, whether it's our U.S. Forest Service, the Los Padres Service in my area, the Channel Islands in my area. So many concessionaires, contracts, folks who had been trained and investments made in their training for almost up to a year, and then dismissed at the last minute from fulfilling that investment. What a loss of resources in the investments that were human capital investments that were made. And no doubt we are seeing parks closing, not having the individuals to, for instance, FEMA can't even go and provide fire training that they had scheduled because they had to curtail back. It has just been chaos, dysfunction, and certainly a lot more costly to do the things that they've done with all these massive layoffs, indiscriminate layoffs, not surgical, not strategic, but stupid to be able to say that they cut government. Well, cutting isn't necessarily achieving many of the goals that they pretended to be in search of or in pursuit of. And so it has been devastating for my district, and I know it's devastating for so many other districts throughout the country.
Really appreciate that response, Congressman. Thank you. I know you've got a lot to do today, this week, and over the next years ahead. So I'll give you the opportunity to say some closing remarks. And thank you again for being here. Always wonderful to spend time with a Marine and a fighter.
Great, Janessa. Well, let me thank you and all of those that are watching and participating today. Vet Voice, certainly Vote Vets, and all the organizations that day in and day out are bringing to light the actions by this administration that are counterproductive. All that you're doing to focus on preserving our public lands and the heritage and the multi-uses of our public lands. You know, it's folks like you all that are making sure we maintain our bipartisan heritage of conservation. And it's too bad that oftentimes in recent years, it's by some become a partisan issue. Since when has protecting our wilderness, our public lands become partisan? it's so stupid and silly that some would see it that way. And instead of really appreciating our national conservation heritage that has been bipartisan in nature, from Teddy Roosevelt way before that to ensuing presidents, the Antiquities Act, all of those things that have led to preserving our monuments, our open spaces, extraordinary lands, Yosemite, all our national parks. This is a bipartisan thing. It's a heritage of our country. With great industrialization came a lot of progress, but it also came a lot of devastation to our ecosystems and the environment and open spaces. And I think we can acknowledge that while we had made a lot of progress, we also need to not forget the potential implications in not conserving wildlands and open spaces and the conservation of these important land, public lands for the public, for future generations, for us to know what the wild is like. There's children today that don't even know where basic food comes from. Agriculture, that it's grown in the fields. They think it just comes from the store. They produce it. And unless you get kids to do experiential experiences, they will never fully understand this heritage and what it means to protect the environment, what it means to live a full life, full of experiences of our natural resources. So thank you all very much.
Thank you again for being here. We really appreciate you. Look forward to continuing the conversation.
Great, likewise. Thank you.
Great. Well, we have another question from viewers that is, does Vet Voice Foundation anticipate sending veterans to DC to campaign for public lands with congressional delegations? And the answer to that is yes, absolutely. If you'd like to be more involved, potentially coming to Washington or meeting with your member when they are at home in district, please reach out to us. Our website is vvfnd.org. You can see it in the bottom right of your screen. You could follow us and message us on Blue Sky, X, or LinkedIn, or Instagram, YouTube. I think we're on all of those channels. So please reach out. Let us know if you'd like to be more involved. We would love to elevate your voice. That is our mission here at Vet Voice Foundation. We are almost 2 million people strong across the country, and we really want to ensure that your voices are heard, that you get to make your case to your elected officials and hold them accountable for their actions or lack of actions to preserve and protect our public lands. Thanks to everyone who's joined us today. I really appreciate it. On behalf of all of us at Vet Voice Foundation, keep up the fight. Thank you so much. Semper Fi. Have a good afternoon.